I'm going to go ahead and start this recording here. All right, and I'll go ahead and share my screen as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about modules 2 and 3 from the online pedagogy training program. I'll let the modules speak for themselves, but we're going to be focusing on key ideas related to, and let me take us back to slide 1 here. Sorry, we'll start at the beginning and not the end. How about that? So there we go. So we'll be focusing on modules 2 and 3, and this is all about communication, collaboration, and engagement in your online classes. And so I'll let the modules speak for themselves, but the key ideas for modules 2 and 3 focus on the communication tools of the learning management system, and that's Blackboard, so things such as email and announcements. But then other key concepts we'll talk about today is about collaboration and engagement. So meaning our discussions, our group work, and our partner work, and how we might use videos in an online class to instruct and teach. And then we'll talk a little bit about inquiry-based learning. So by October 15th, your deliverables for modules 2 and 3. Module 2 is about creating a discussion prompt that aligns with the learning objectives of your course. In module 3, your deliverable is about creating an activity that draws upon learning principles that again aligns with the learning objectives of your course. So in today's session, I want to give you all the tools that you need to complete these assignments for modules 2 and 3 effectively. If at any point as you're working through the modules in the next several weeks, if you have any questions, please never hesitate to contact me. And again, here's my contact information for you. You can always email me, and we can always schedule an appointment. Virtually we can meet, or if you're ever on campus and you want to meet face-to-face, we can do that as well. But I am available to help you out as you work through these modules and as you create your assignments. So if you have your smartphone with you, you can just point it at this QR code. And we had a little bit of a check-in a moment ago, but I want to ask you, how many years of experience do you have teaching face-to-face classes? And if you look at, if you point your camera at this QR code, you'll see a survey there. And then the other question here is about your associations that you have with teaching and learning online. So we're going to go really big picture for a little bit, and let's go up to 30,000 feet if we want to use an airplane analogy, and think about how many students were in online classes. And you can see this statistic from 2019. We have over 7 million students enrolled in some type of online course in higher ed. And so this number, I'm paying attention to the National Center for Educational Statistics because I anticipate pretty soon we'll see the fall 2020 numbers being released. And I wonder what those 2020 numbers will look like with online engagement. What we're really looking at here is the skills of a 21st century educator. And when we think about teaching and learning in the 21st century, we're talking about these teaching competencies. And these teaching competencies include, of course, technological support for your students. And a teacher who embraces 21st century teaching competencies is one who knows how technology can support learning. So while our focus is on online teaching, I want you to think about, even in an on-site face-to-face classroom, how you might be able to integrate technology to support your students. And so with our online interests, we're really ultimately talking about creating communities of inquiry in online classes. And this community of inquiry approach can absolutely be applied to your face-to-face courses as well. So I hope that as we move through today's lessons, I know that it may be challenging to think about teaching your particular subject matter in an online forum, but I want you to think about that as you go through today's training and this entire program. But also keep in mind that this framework of a community of inquiry, this can be applied to your face-to-face classes as well. Because obviously we want to have the most effective communication when we teach our students. We also want to foster environments that support collaboration and engagement. So when we think about a community of inquiry, we're really talking about these three different aspects of teaching and learning. And that is social presence and teaching presence and cognitive presence. And these three components of an online class have been studied extensively, and I've included a few studies down below just for your visual reference. But I want to point out to you that the very first study is as early as 1989. So this is a really tried and true approach and framework for teaching and learning in higher ed and online classes. So when we think about modules 2 and 3 and how we communicate and collaborate and foster engagement, let's just break it down a little bit, because these are the bigger points that we're really looking at. So when we think about our community of inquiry framework, we're thinking about students, a group of individuals who are engaged in a collaborative manner around purposeful discourse, and those individuals reflect on their understanding and they construct personal meaning about the subject matter that you're teaching them. When we think about the community of inquiry framework, we're talking about a collaborative and what we call a constructivist learning experience. And I have a feeling that a constructivist learning experience is going to make a lot of sense to you guys. This is about really creating opportunities for learning that build upon experience. And so let's break this down a little bit more and examine what we mean by this constructivist teaching theory. And this is gonna, again, we're staying at 30,000 feet. We're staying at big picture. And then we're gonna get into the details of how we do this in the classroom. But let's stay big picture for just a second so that you understand really what we mean when we talk about constructivist teaching theory, because this is what you're doing in your classes, really. You know this already, I bet. But when we think about constructivist approach to teaching, we're really about creating opportunities for the learner to build on this personal experience that they have, to be actively engaged in the learning process. When we think about a connectivist approach to learning, we're really thinking about how the learner can be self-directed in learning, right? Learning in groups, learning within a community of learners. And if you notice the visual for a moment, you'll notice that constructivism and connectivism is orange. And these orange quadrants in this visual correlate to what we reference as student-centered or learner-centered approaches to teaching, as opposed to the blue quadrants, which tend to focus more on teacher-centered approaches to teaching, instructional methods, right? So the communities of inquiry are really all about how we enable our students to become self-directed and how they can build on experience learning the subject matter. So let's continue exploring what we really mean by a community of inquiry. We know that it has three different components to it: the social presence, the cognitive presence, and then what we call the teaching presence. So the social presence here is all about the ability of the learners to identify within the community. It's about communicating in a trustful environment and developing these interpersonal skills, right? So this is all the social aspect of learning. When we think about teaching presence, and again, notice it's teaching presence and not teacher presence. We'll talk about that, but it's teaching. So this is about designing and facilitating and directing purposeful and meaningful learning, how we're guiding students. And when we talk about teaching presence, we're also very much thinking about students teaching each other. Of course, you, the instructor, teaching the students and how you make your presence visible in an online class. But we're very much also talking about students working collaboratively and teaching one another in an online class. Finally, we're talking about cognitive presence when we think about a community of inquiry in an online class. And when we think about cognitive presence, this is about really the learners being able to construct and really confirm their understanding of course concepts through sustained reflection, right? Through a discourse that you see in a text-based environment. And again, I include a study just for your visual reference. Of course, you're encouraged to check it out. But I include this because this goes back to the year 2000, 2001. And so this model of a community of inquiry has been applied to many different disciplines over the past really 20 plus years. And so we understand how this works in online teaching and learning environments. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second here. And I want to just come back to you guys for a moment before we go on and ask you, do you have any questions or concerns at this point? I see a lot of other folks have just joined us. And let's see, I'm checking the chat pod right now. So hopefully word is getting out here that people are getting into the right course, into the right virtual room here. Thank you, Andrea, for letting me know. And so people are joining us. So that's a great thing. Are there any questions or comments so far about communities of inquiry or our social teaching, social presence, teaching presence, or cognitive presence? I just want to pause and check back in to see how everyone's doing. If you're okay, you can just type in the chat pod. So far, okay. All good so far. Thanks for the feedback. I normally have a few other people facilitating the discussion. I don't have anyone else facilitating with me today, so I'm managing the presentation component. When I share my screen, the Blackboard Collaborate screen goes blank, so I can't really see anything that's going on. And once I start sharing my screen, y'all kind of disappear for a second. But so far, so good. Okay, you guys, if you do have any questions, don't be shy. You can just speak up, type them into the chat pod, and I'll come back from time to time just to check in with you guys. All right, excellent. So let me go ahead then and resume. And again, for everyone that's joining us, I'm sorry about the mix-up with the correct room to go to, and I'm glad that you have found where you are to be. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen again. And we can continue with our part 2 here. All right, so All right, so now what I want to do is we're still staying at 30,000 feet and we're thinking about how we or why we facilitate communication, collaboration, and engagement in our online classes. And we're doing this to create a community of inquiry for our students. And this visual just breaks it down a little bit more for you in terms of what we really mean in terms of our teaching when we want to think about cognitive presence, for example. When we think about cognitive presence, we're really thinking about how we present our information to our students. And the visual here says a triggering event. So how might we present our information in a way that grabs their attention, in a way that creates this initial sense of puzzlement, as the visual shows us, or curiosity about the subject? It could be maybe presenting a problem for them to figure out, but we're engaging them in some way. And then we explore that topic. We integrate that new information with what we already know, or what we've just learned in a previous module, or an experience that maybe we've had, right? So we're creating these opportunities to apply new ideas. All of this is about cognitive presence in your online courses. When we think about social presence is really about a trusting environment. Social presence is all about really being comfortable expressing yourself. It's about risk taking. It's about feeling comfortable that if you say something and you make a mistake, it's okay. We're here to learn, right? We're about encouraging collaborative discovery in our classes. So how do we create social presence? That's an important part of an online community of learners. And then finally, we have our teaching presence. And so again, I want to just be clear. We have, of course, our role as a teacher. This is about what we're doing to indicate our presence, but it's also what we're doing to just facilitate teaching in general. So how are we managing instruction in the classroom? How are we building understanding? How are we focusing discussion in the online classroom? So again, our visual just to help us understand these elements and how they overlap. In our online classes, when we think about communicating and collaborating and engaging with students, we're doing this to build social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And you can see how all of these things really do overlap to create an educational experience for our learners. All right. So now let's drop down from 30,000 feet. That's the theory, you guys. That's the extent of it. So now we want to go down to ground level and think about in the classroom how we can create these communities of inquiry. So in terms of collaborating and communicating and engaging, we want to always think about our introductory activities. And we, of course, think about this in week 1 with icebreakers, for example. But there's no reason why we can't continue with icebreakers throughout the first few weeks of the course, or come back to them from time to time, because there's always a wonderful opportunity to, again, build that social presence in the course, where you engage in a fun, risk-free activity where you're helping students get to know you and also the other learners in the classroom. That helps to create this comfortable online environment. Another introductory activity, and especially important for our academic standards, is a syllabus scavenger hunt, for example. Well, maybe in the first week of school, you create an activity where students have to go through the syllabus and identify key components like your grading breakdown, for example, or your late policy for homework, for example, or confirm they understand what academic honesty means, for example. There's different ways you might want to think about that, but that's what a syllabus scavenger hunt could be. And that's a nice way to introduce some of the more course policies, if you will. A syllabus quiz, some faculty use that as well, where it's a very simple quiz, doesn't have to be very complicated, but it's a way that you can receive confirmation that the students have understood the policies that you're setting forth as the instructor. Oftentimes our students are brand new to online learning and they've never used a learning management system before, and a practice assignment that requires them to submit a document or maybe do other aspects of an online student, right? Do something that gives them some experience with a skill that they're going to have to use a lot to do well in your course. That's something that can be done as an ice-breaking activity or in the introductory portions of your class to start creating that community of learners. When we think about creating a supportive learning community for our students, we want to, of course, use a variety of communication tools to support our learners. So oftentimes, in the very beginning of the semester, week 1, instructors will post a welcome letter, right? You can make a post that introduces yourself to the class. This helps students to feel comfortable, and also they do the same thing. So everyone is posting some type of introductory welcome letter to the course. As the course moves throughout the semester, using announcements is a tool that's built right into the learning management system. And this helps to communicate with the entire course about, or all the students about due dates, for example, or maybe current events. Maybe you see something happening that relates directly to your curriculum, and you can just tie that right in with your learning, so it becomes more of a real world application for our students. You can use announcements to send updates about syllabus, or maybe even characteristics of previous assignments, right? You can use announcements in a variety of ways, but it's great practice to become comfortable using those announcement features. You can, of course, use email. You can use class email, or a group rather, or you can, of course, send individual emails to students, but you want to be careful not to start teaching through email, right? We want to teach on the learning management system. Videos are a great way for instructors and students to contribute to this social presence and cognitive presence and teaching presence, right? So in terms of your role as an instructor, you can certainly use videos to explain an assignment. Of course, you're going to have it written down and provided in writing. But oftentimes, if you just explain it in a minute or a 30-second video, sometimes that helps. And that, again, increases your social presence in the course. You can use video or audio to give feedback to students, to offer brief demonstrations, or if you have a little mini lecture you want to deliver, you can certainly use a video to deliver a mini lecture. And here I have 6 minutes as our ideal time for a lecture, a video lecture. And this may seem like a random number, like why 6 minutes? Why is that so important? Well, I can back that up with this incredible study that was done where educators analyzed 6 million videos. Of course, the computers did this, but we analyzed 6 million videos. These are videos that were used for instructional purposes. So some of you probably know about Khan Academy or TED Talks, for example. These were all components of massive open enrollment online courses, MOOCs, MOOCs. And in these massive open enrollment online courses, educators watched, how long did people watch a video for educational purposes? And 6 minutes was like the magic number. 100% of people watched the videos for 6 minutes. And after that, the numbers dropped significantly. And so we tend to want to use, short, brief sessions when we want to teach through video. And then finally, of course, discussions. We can use our discussions in our classrooms, and we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that right now. But the discussions are what really guide students' learning and encourage this teaching presence. So let's talk about how we can use discussions in our online classes. That is such an integral part of an asynchronous online course. So when we think about our discussions, we really want to include discussion topics. We want to create discussion topics that are authentic, they're meaningful to the students, and there's relevance to the discussion prompts that we're going to be using. We want to, of course, always be clear with our instructions and what we expect students to be able to do. What do we expect them to learn, right? What are the expectations for this discussion? So some really practical things. In an online class, it's always a good idea to let students know when their first post is due. So for example, the online courses every week is a module. Things begin on Monday morning at 12 o'clock and close Sunday nights. And so it's common for online instructors to say, students, here's our discussion topic. I want you to respond to the discussion topic no later than Wednesday for your first post, or sometimes Tuesday. And then you have to respond to your classmates no later than Friday, for example, or no later than Saturday. You know, you can set these timelines, but it's important to be clear about when you expect participation, the first post, and then the response to the peers. When we think about discussions, we don't want to overuse them. We don't want to, you don't have to have them every week. You can if you want, but really we've discovered, educators have discovered that weekly discussions, not surprisingly, tend to result in less participation. Maybe they start off strong, but participation tends to drop if they're every week. So think about your course learning outcomes, think about your assignments and your projects, and it's okay to have a discussion every other week, or maybe every couple of weeks. You know, you can change it up. Use a variety of questions when you create your topics, and think about when is it most effective to use a discussion. We want it to be purposeful. So think about that as you contemplate this week's assignment. Let's talk a little bit more about discussion. You can see here the very final point here is use a discussion rubric. And I know that you've been introduced to that term, a rubric, already. In yesterday's session, you talked a little bit about rubrics. So let's just look at one example of a discussion rubric, a grading tool, right? Something that makes the criteria clear for the students and something that really outlines the levels of achievement. That's what a rubric does. And so there's many types of rubrics that we can use for our discussions, but what this rubric does successfully is it shows you the discussion post, the initial post, and then responding to peers, right? Responding to classmates. And so this steps out the levels of achievement. And so maybe your rubric that you would use only has 3 levels of achievement. Maybe you can have, you know, not passing, passing, and fantastic. This one has 4. So we have marginal, and then this is what's expected. And then here we have the high quality. So again, this is just an example. You don't have to think of this too much right now, but it's important when you think about designing your discussion prompt, how would you also score that discussion prompt, right? How would you evaluate that on some level? And so this just gives you some impression of what we mean by a discussion rubric. All right, and then when we think about our discussions, there's a number of ways we can approach our discussions in our online classes. And with the learning management system Blackboard, you as the instructor are able to assign actual roles to students in a discussion. So in the previous slide, I said it's important to change it up. Use a variety of questions, and I'll get into that a little bit more in just a second here, but also to assign discussion roles. And so let's take a look at some of these ideas here. So in your discussion, you can assign groups. Let's say you have a class of 20 students. That's kind of a lot for one discussion. And so it's really ideal to assign students to groups. And so you can do it in a variety of ways. Here, I give you one example where you can assign in Blackboard the student the role of a grader. And using the rubric that you would design, the student in the hat of the grader could grade the discussion, right? Use a discussion rubric to give feedback to peers. A student could be a participant, where this is the week that they have to participate in the discussion topic and read and reply to posts. Another role could be the role of a reader. And readers can read the contents of the forum, but they can't post a response or add any threads. And so if you have weekly discussions, this is a way to break it up a little bit and have students wearing different hats or having different roles in that discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a second here and just come back to you guys so I can see if there's any questions or comments. And how are we doing so far? Is there any reactions that you have or any questions that you have to anything that I've said so far about our communities of inquiry for those of you that maybe came in a little bit later, or anything about discussions so far? Anything that I can clarify? Just want to make sure we're okay, and I see many more have joined, which is fantastic. All right, thumbs up, I see, that's good. Right on, okay, good. So I'm gonna go back here to our presentation mode. All right, Kevin, thank you. You guys are good. All right. Let me go back here and share my screen. All right, so let's move forward a little bit. And now let's think about specifically how you can design your discussion. This is the assignment for Module 2, is come up with a discussion topic prompt. And so here are a few ideas that you might want to consider when thinking about your discussion prompt. So we want to always ask different types of questions. We don't want to have the same type of discussion topic every single week. Or even if you go every other week, you still want to mix it up. So some options include exploratory questions. With exploratory questions, we're really asking students to confirm their understanding, state in their own words how they might approach a particular problem or explain a particular concept, right? This is an exploratory type of question that encourages discussion, that encourages dialogue. It encourages the exploration and the learning process. Maybe another approach could be challenging questions, asking students to reflect on a particular issue and to form an opinion about the topic. A relational type of question will ask students to relate a concept covered in your class and apply it to a real world scenario, right? Or to compare and contrast different approaches to something, right? Maybe you teach them how to do something a certain way or how to approach a problem a certain way. And then they discover that, wow, you know, I found this over here and there's another way that we could do it. So maybe comparing these relational properties can help students. A diagnostic question is another great strategy. This strategy would require you to present an incorrect solution to a problem. You would tell them, of course, there's something wrong with this, but here's a problem here, and this is an incorrect solution. And then you ask students to analyze, well, what the problem is, how might you go about fixing that problem, right? What are the correct steps that you would need to follow to fix that problem? But they're diagnosing something. That's a real world learning situation. Or an action question. asking students to solve any given problem, right? And maybe there's more than one way to solve a problem, right? But they can then, that encourages dialogue, it encourages debate in the classroom. It helps that discovery process, right? That exploration, the exploratory process. And then another option could be to present a summary question. So asking students to summarize. What did you learn this week? You tell me. What were your big takeaways? And sometimes a very simple question like that, you guys, really helps you as the instructor assess their understanding, but it also helps students assess each other's understanding. And again, this is really about that teaching presence, right? Because of course it's you, the teacher, but teaching is also about the students teaching each other. So when we ask students to summarize something, other students are going to read these summaries and say, wow, you really got that, or wait, what's going on here, or explain that more, right? Or I never thought about it that way, and this is what I learned from it. So those summary types of questions really help everyone take note of where they're at in the learning process. So these are some strategies that you can think about when designing the questions. Another component that we want to address, and what is covered in modules 2 and 3, is how to create group work in your online classes. And again, it's entirely possible. I just showed you that in Blackboard, you can actually assign roles to students, but you can also assign a number of students to a group. And when you do that, you want to assign 3 to 5 students in a group. And really, 4 is a good number. 3 to 5 works. 5 gets a little bit larger, but sometimes we have larger courses. But when we assign students to the group, we want to make sure that students have certain roles. And again, this depends on what your course learning outcomes are and how long students might be working in groups, right? If this is going to be a group project that, covers several weeks, it's going to be more important to assign different types of roles and responsibilities to the students. This helps to democratize the learning experience. And we don't want anyone to just take over. And then, of course, the pitfall of group work, if it's not structured properly, is there's always the one student that will do everything, or the resentful students who, the process just doesn't work for them. But if we carefully and purposefully design the instruction and the task, group work is absolutely essential in creating these communities of inquiry in an online class. And again, this totally works for your on-site courses as well. But these are just a couple of different examples here of different roles that are appropriate for group activities or larger group work projects. At the very bottom, I have a bullet point that says model team roles after typical roles in your industry. So think about the different fields that you represent. Think about how group work works out in your industries, and we can help to model real world application of our teaching, of our concepts, by incorporating these types of roles into our academic responsibilities, academic courses. This helps make our content so much more authentic and genuine and meaningful for our students. So just a few different ideas about making group work in an online environment. So all of this, and I showed you this visual a few moments ago about constructivism and connectivism. So when we think about modules 2 and 3 about communication and collaboration and engagement, we're really talking about inquiry-based learning. And that is used in module 3. You're going to watch a short video in module 3 in which Christy explains a little bit about inquiry-based learning. And so again, I'll let the modules speak for themselves, but what I want to do now is just give you a little bit of a bigger picture view of what inquiry-based learning is. And again, it's really based on that constructivist approach to teaching and learning, where that learner is building on the experiences that they're having in your class, for example. You're creating these learning moments, these learning experiences, whether that be on-site or online, but you're creating these learning opportunities. And then a constructivist approach is about building on that learning experience and being actively engaged in this learning process. So with inquiry-based learning, we're really thinking about students creating questions of their own. This is a wonderful way for you to assess their understanding, to gauge where they're starting from. This could be done in the beginning of a unit, and then again at the end of the unit, right? But students creating questions of their own really helps them to become engaged and to create that student-driven or that self-directed learning component in your classes. Students obtaining supporting evidence to answer the questions, right? Using video, where students can explain the evidence that they've collected. Students can then connect these explanations to the knowledge that they've obtained through the class discussions that you've created, but that investigative process, right, is important. Oftentimes, it's beneficial for students to create an argument or justification for a certain explanation that they've discovered. But again, all of this is about real-world applications, reflecting on that process of learning. And this is all based in, you might want to Google active learning techniques, discovery learning, but problem-based learning are all connected to what we're talking about here with your online course design. So as we move towards the final few moments of this presentation, think about this as we go forward with your on-site and online teaching. Think about what your role is as a teacher. You know, when you think about teaching in an on-site classroom, what is your role in an on-site classroom? If you think about designing your class for an online format, is your role any different? Do you have different tools at hand that might change how you present your subject matter? So this is a big kind of rhetorical question, but think about your role. Reflect on that in an online environment or an on-site environment. For online, how might you create opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding, their skills online? And then how might you adapt your on-site activities, you know, for an online environment? So what we've just done is we've just gone through how you can create open-ended discussion prompts. And then we've given you enough of the learning principles for you to reflect on for creating an activity that aligns with the objectives of your course. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing again and come back to you guys real time and ask you at this point, what reactions or comments or questions might you have about inquiry-based learning, or how you might go ahead with creating some type of discussion prompt for your online classes. And we can go ahead and turn on our cameras and conclude today's session with some face-to-face interaction, a little bit of back and forth discussion here. What from today's class speaks to you or resonates with you with our online teaching and learning?
Yeah, I actually did have a question for you.
Absolutely.
I was just asking about the discussion board. When it comes to exploratory questions, you were saying like it was in their own words. Does that mean you give like a question that's that's kind of, is it like an open-ended question, or I mean, are you just looking for an opinion on that, or are we looking for an actual factual answer when it comes to those on the exploratory?
Good question. And so exploratory questions are really going to be more of that open-ended. So in the framework of creating a discussion topic, we want to avoid, and I'm not saying this is wrong or bad, there's none of that, but really you said open-ended, which is great, because we want to encourage that dialogue. If we tend to have too many questions about fact-based, well, we said the fact, and at a certain point we can't exhaust that topic anymore. But we might want to encourage students, well, here's the fact about whatever, but what are the implications? What does that mean, right? Or extending that fact so we can explore that on a larger level. We just don't want to shut down the conversation quickly. We want to do what we can to encourage that and sustain that dialogue. So does that make a little sense to you?
Oh yeah, definitely, because yeah, I was just confused on that, like, you know, what you were expecting, what they expect from an exploratory question. So it's a question that can have an answer, but it can also have multiple answers as long as it keeps the discussion going, right?
Absolutely. So for example, and I'll reflect on my art history teaching experience where, art history tends to be it can be, and often is very fact oriented, and but then there's also other ways that we can approach it. And that is, for example, well, when we think about restoring artwork, that led to a lot of fruitful discussion, because sometimes when we restore, or that we debate between restoring artwork or preserving it, and sometimes with restoration we're losing some of that original work, but then we're trying to preserve it. And so there's always this nice little dialogue that goes on with how much of the artist's original hand is being lost in that process, how much are we keeping, do we really want to preserve it? What's the benefit of doing that? Sometimes art just disintegrates. And so there's many different ways I can approach that. And so I was able to transform some of these more fact-based things into, well, let's just look at the possibilities of this. So let's look at the multiple angles we can use to approach a topic. And so that helps us with an online discussion. Just encourage it, right? So that's what we're thinking about here.
Okay.
Good. And anything else? What other topics or questions might you have?
I had a question. How do you pull yourself out of lecture mode and then switch over to the moderator mode? Yeah.
Right, good. So that's a great question. So when we think about our online learning experiences with an online class, you're going to have different components of your online class. And so you could, in a weekly, kind of week by week breakdown, maybe include a brief video of yourself explaining a topic, or demonstrating a technique or a process, and you would have short, brief videos explaining these ideas. And that would be one component that students would access on their own time. And then you might have some written elements as well, where you're explaining things and you have your, prose to explain stuff. So students are going to read that. But then the discussion board will be a separate element. And in the discussion board, you're going to give students a prompt. So in this week's lesson, we've learned about the cultural context of Hellenistic Greek art. That's my example. So that's what we're learning about in the modules. In the discussion, though, I want you to explore the route that Alexander the Great took when he conquered the known world, as it was called at the time. What are the implications of that conquest of the known world for Alexander the Great? So that's my discussion prompt. Now I've given students something to explore, and they're going to come back with all of these implications of what happened after Alexander the Great left Greece and he went all the way over to India and died by the year 323 BC. It changed world history. It changed Western art. It changed Eastern art. So there's tons of implications there. So I'm presenting that question to my students in the discussion board. They're participating during the week. As the instructor, I'm going to definitely go in and look at the discussion, see how it's going. What I recommend doing is not dominating that discussion board, because we don't want to get back into the teaching aspect of that discussion board where we're controlling it. We want to facilitate the student engagement. So what I do is I go in there and I say, oh, like Monday, I'm always in there, of course, and I set it up, I get everyone going, I might post a video that relates to the topic, whatever. But then I go in on Tuesday, I see how the discussion's going. By Wednesday, I check in again. And I say, hey, I noticed that everyone is talking about blah, blah, blah. Fantastic. Or maybe by Thursday, I need to step in again because I see some misunderstanding going on. And so I might redirect the discussion. Or maybe the discussion's gone completely off topic. And I'm like, hey guys, I'm glad you're talking about this and this and this, but let's bring it back to the implications of Alexander the Great conquering the known world, right? That's what we're really looking at today, right? So does that help guide that a little bit for you?
Yeah, actually, that was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're welcome. Yeah, so, and again, when we think about that community of inquiry framework, that social presence and that cognitive presence and that teaching presence, as teachers, we want to demonstrate that we're actively engaged and we're present, we're there. But the teaching present doesn't mean that we're teacher all the time and we're just totally like dominating that discussion. Because you'll discover very quickly that if you do that, the students are going to tend to take a backseat approach and be like, oh, the teacher does everything. And that's exactly what we don't want to have happen, right? It doesn't matter if you're on site or online, but especially online, we really want students to get engaged and build that discussion. So I like to point out themes that are coming up, and by the end of the week, like on Friday, for example, I'll say, hey, you guys, it's Friday. I've been checking in on the discussions, and I notice all of these things going on. Maybe I'll make an announcement again or post in the discussion itself what our goal is and refocus it for the weekend, push it a little bit further. But it's balancing that discussion and moderating and facilitating that discussion. So really good points to bring up. Thank you for the question. What else? Any other questions about the assignment that you're working on for creating a discussion post or creating an assignment for your class? All right, I thank you for filling out that survey. In the beginning of the session, I asked you to take a brief little survey, and I want to share those results with you. Let me just show you real quickly here the survey. And let me share my screen. Okay, I hope that you can see this all right. So I asked you in the beginning of our session, how many years have you taught face-to-face courses? And you can see our voting results here. I know, sorry about that, you guys, but look at the responses that we have here. And this gives you, and I ask you this because your face-to-face experience is going to be so important and is helping you with your online, thinking about an online class. And again, don't worry if you're new to face-to-face teaching as well and you're new to online teaching, don't worry about that either. I'm here I can help you out. So, I'm easily accessible. But this gives you a voting breakdown, and we have a nice variety of responses here for your face-to-face teaching experience. And then the other question I asked you was associations that you might have with online teaching and learning. And I'm thrilled to see these responses. We see inspirational, transpirational, or inspirational is what it is, inspiring, performance, leading, creative, quick, quality, so a number of associations. But I hope that this has helped you to get a little better understanding of what we mean with encouraging collaboration and creativity in your online classes, how we can use group work to really facilitate that community of inquiry. I thank you so much for your time today, everyone. I'm going to end our recording right now, but I'm more than